Commerce Alive Today presents
American Motors Corporation. In January 1954, Nash-Kelvinator Corporation began the acquisition of the Hudson Motor Car Company. The new corporation would be called the American Motors Corporation. An earlier corporation with the same name, co-founded by Louis Chevrolet, had existed in Plainfield, New Jersey, from 1916 through 1922 before merging into the Bessemer, American Motors Corporation. The Nash-Kelvinator/Hudson deal was a straight stock transfer and finalized in the spring of 1954, forming the fourth biggest auto company in the U.S. with assets of $355 million and more than $100 million in working capital. The new company retained Hudson CEO A.E. Barrett as a consultant, and he took a seat on the board of directors. Nash's George W. Mason became president and CEO. Mason, the architect of the merger, believed that the survival of the U.S.'s remaining independent automakers depended on their joining to form one multiple-brand company capable of challenging the Big Three as an equal. The frantic 1953-54 Ford/GM price war devastated the remaining independent automakers. The reasons for the merger between Nash and Hudson included helping cut costs and strengthen their sales organizations to meet the intense competition expected from auto's Big Three. One quick result from the merger was the doubling up with Nash on purchasing and production, allowing Hudson to cut prices an average of $155 on the Wasp line, and up to $204 on the more expensive Hornet models. After the merger, AMC had its first profitable quarter during the second 3 months of 1955, earning $1,592,307, compared to a loss of $3,848,667 during the same period in the previous year. Mason also entered into informal discussions with James J. Nance of Packard to outline his strategic vision. Interim plans were made for American Motors to buy Packard Ultramatic automatic transmissions and Packard V8 engines for certain American Motors products. In July 1954, Packard acquired Studebaker. The new Studebaker Packard Corporation made the new 320cu in Packard V8 engine and Packard's Ultramatic automatic transmission available to American Motors for its 1955 Nash Ambassador and Hudson Hornet models. When Mason died in 1954, George W. Romney succeeded him. Ironically, Romney had once been offered Nance's job. In 1948, Romney received offers from Packard for the post of Chief Operating Officer and from Nash for the number 2 position in the company. Although the Packard offer would have paid more, Romney decided to work under Mason because he thought Nash had a brighter future. Studebaker Packard President James Nance refused to consider merging with American Motors unless he could take the top position. And a week after Mason's death, Romney announced, "There are no mergers underway either directly or indirectly." Romney agreed with Mason's commitment to buy SP products. Mason and Nance had agreed that SP would endeavor to purchase parts from American Motors in return, but SP did not do so. As the Packard engines and transmissions were comparatively expensive, American Motors began development of its own V8. American Motors also spent $40 million developing its double-safe single-unit monocoque, which debuted in the 1956 model year. In mid-1956, the 352cu in Packard V8 and twin Ultramatic transmission were phased out and replaced by American Motors' new V8 and by GM Hydromatic and BorgWarner transmissions. American Motors combined the Nash and Hudson product lines under a common manufacturing strategy in 1955, with the production of Nash's and Hudson's consolidated at the Nash plant in Kenosha. The Detroit Hudson plant was converted to military contract production and eventually sold. The separate Nash and Hudson dealer networks were retained. The Hudsons were redesigned to harmonize with Nash's body styles. The fast-selling Nash Rambler model was sold as a Nash and a Hudson in 1955 and 1956. These badge-engineered Ramblers, and similarly the small Metropolitans, were identical except for the hubcaps, nameplates, and other minor trim. The pre-existing full-size Nash product line was continued with the Nash Statesman restyled as the new Hudson Wasp and the Nash Ambassador restyled as the Hudson Hornet. Although the cars shared the same body shell, they were at least as different from one another as Chevrolet and Pontiac. Hudsons and Nashes each used their engines as they had previously. The Hudson Hornet continued to offer the 308 cu that had powered the NASCAR champion during the early 1950s. The Wasp now used the former engine of the Hudson Jet. The Nash Ambassador and Statesman continued with overhead, valve and L-head 6s, respectively. Hudson and Nash cars had different front suspensions. Trunk lids were interchangeable, but other body panels, rear window glass, dash panels, and braking systems differed. The Hudson Hornet, Wasp, and their Nash counterparts had improved ride, visibility, and fuel economy because of their lighter unitized Nash bod. The larger Nash and Hudson range did not sell well, and AMC lost money each year. Dismayed with the results, Romney decided in 1956 that the company's future lay with the compact Rambler line. Romney halted production on the new large cars and focused entirely on the new Rambler 6 and V8, introducing them in 1956, despite being scheduled for a 1957 release. Sales of the new Ramblers were poor, and sales of the Hudson and Nash models were almost non-existent, resulting in a $31.7 million operating loss for 1956. Sales improved in 1957, but the company saw a $11.8 million loss. In response, Romney launched a massive public relations campaign, traveling 70,000 miles nationwide in 12 months. Romney spoke at union halls, dinners, churches, fairgrounds, and radio and TV stations. He was anywhere where he could get the word out about Rambler. Rambler sales took off in 1958, up 58.7%, and 425 new dealers were signed up. As a result, 1958 became AMC's first year of profitability since its formation, with $28 million in earnings. The Nash and Hudson brands were dropped, and Rambler became a mark in its own right and the mainstay of the company. The popular British-built Metropolitan subcompact continued as a standalone brand until it was discontinued in 1961. The prototype 1958 Nash Ambassador/Hudson Hornet, built on a stretched Rambler platform, was renamed at the last minute as Ambassador by Rambler. To round out the model line, American Motors reintroduced the previous 1955 100 in wheelbase Nash Rambler as the new Rambler American with only a few modifications. This gave Rambler a compact lineup that included the reintroduced American, the 108 in wheelbase Rambler 6 and Rebel V8, as well as the 117 in wheelbase Ambassador. Sales of Ramblers soared in the late 1950s partly because of American Motors' focus on the compact car and its marketing efforts. These included sponsoring the hugely popular Walt Disney Anthology television series and as an exhibitor at the Disneyland theme park in Anaheim, California. George Romney himself pitched the Rambler product in television commercials. While the Big Three introduced ever larger cars, American Motors followed a dinosaur fighter strategy. George W. Romney's leadership focused the company on the compact car, a fuel-efficient vehicle 20 years before there was a real need for them. This gave Romney a high profile in the media. Two core strategic factors came into play: one, the use of shared components in American Motors products, and two, a refusal to participate in the Big Three's restyling race. This cost control policy helped Rambler develop a reputation for building solid economy cars. Company officials were confident in the changing market and in 1959 announced a $10 million expansion of its Kenosha complex to increase annual straight-time capacity from 300,000 to 440,000 cars. A letter to shareholders in 1959 claimed that the introduction of new compact cars by American Motors' large domestic competitors for the 1960 model year signals the end of big car domination in the U.S., and that American Motors predicts small car sales in the U.S. may reach 3 million units by 1963. American Motors was also beginning to experiment with non-gasoline-powered automobiles. On April 1, 1959, American Motors and Sonotone Corporation announced a joint research effort to consider producing an electric car that was to be powered by a self-charging battery. Sonotone had the technology for making sintered plate nickel-cadmium batteries that can be recharged very rapidly and are lighter than a typical automobile lead-acid battery. In 1959, American Motors hired designer Dick Teague, who had previously worked for General Motors, Packard, and Chrysler. After Edmund E. Anderson left the company in 1961, Teague was named principal designer and in 1964, vice president. For example, the Rambler Classic was equipped with a standard tandem master cylinder in 1962 that provided stopping ability even if there was a failure in the brake system. Only Cadillac also included this safety feature 6 years before U.S. safety regulations required it on all cars. Rambler also was an early pioneer in offering an automatic shift indicator sequence PRND2D1L, where if 1 selected D2, the car started in second gear, while 1 began in first gear on its flash-o-matic transmission, which is similar to today's PRNDSL shift pattern, made mandatory for the 1968 model year cars, which required a neutral position between reverse and drive, while General Motors still offered a shift selector that had reverse immediately next to low gear well into the 1960s. Unique in the U.S. automotive industry, American Motors offered adjustable front seat backrests from their Nash origin, and in 1964, the Classic and Ambassador were equipped with standard dual reclining front seats nearly a decade before the Big Three offered them as options. Bendix disc brakes were made standard on the Marlin and optional on other models in 1965. This made the Marlin one of the first modern American cars with standard disc brakes, while the Big Three did not offer them until the early 1970s on most of their models to meet federal motor vehicle safety standards. In the early part of the decade, sales were strong, thanks in no small part to the company's history of building small cars, which came into vogue in 1961. In both 1960 and 1961, Ramblers ranked in third place among U.S. automobile sales, up from third on the strength of small car sales, even in the face of a lot of new competition. Romney's strategic focus was very successful, as reflected in the firm's healthy profits year after year. The company became completely debt-free. The financial success allowed the company to reach an agreement on August 26, 1961, with the United Auto Workers for a profit-sharing plan that was new in the automobile industry. Its new 3-year labor contract included generous annual improvement pay increases and automatic cost-of-living raises. However, in 1962, Romney resigned to run for governor of Michigan. His replacement was Roy Abernethy, American Motors' successful sales executive. By 1964, Studebaker production in the United States had ended, and its Canadian operations ceased in 1966. The Big Three, plus the smaller American Motors, Kaiser Jeep, International Harvester, Avanti, and Checker companies were the remaining North American auto manufacturers. Abernethy believed that American Motors' reputation of building reliable, economical cars could translate into a new strategy that could follow AMC buyers as they traded into larger, more expensive vehicles. American Motors, in reality, had produced large cars throughout its history. The Rambler Ambassadors were as large as a full-sized Ford or Chevy. There was only an absence of largest-sized cars from the American Motors lineup in 1963 and 1964. The first cars bearing his signature were the 1965 models. The 1965 models were a major makeover of the new platform that had just been introduced in 1963. These were a longer Ambassador series and new convertibles for the larger models. During mid-year, a fastback, called the Marlin, was added. It competed directly with cars like the Dodge Charger, but AMC's family-sized fastback emphasized personal luxury. The continuing quest, in the business world's toughest race, the grinding contest against the big three automobile makers also meant annual styling changes requiring large expenditures. American Motors' management total confidence that the new 1965 models would stem a bothersome decline actually began falling behind in share of sales. Moreover, a new line of redesigned cars in the full and mid-sized markets was launched in the fall of 1966. The cars won acclaim for their fluid styling, and Abernethy's ideas did work as Ambassador sales increased significantly. However, the dated designs of the Rambler Americans hurt its sales, which offset gains from Ambassador sales. There were quality control problems with introducing the new full-sized cars and persistent rumors of the company's demise because of its precarious cash flow. Consumer Reports' negative ratings for American Motors' safety did not help. During this time, AMC's international sales were expanding. From only 18,000 cars 5 years ago, the 1965 model year AMC sold 74,420 vehicles in Canada, Europe, and Latin America. AMC remained the most significant U.S. seller of autos in both France and Germany. Abernethy also called for the de-emphasis of the Rambler brand because he believed the public associated it too strongly with economy cars and that it was hindering the sale of American Motors' other models at a time when mid- and luxury car sales were robust. As a result, he ordered that for 1966, the Ambassador and Marlin were to be badged purely as a product of American Motors. The strategy shift at first seemed to be working because sales of the redesigned 1965 and 1966 Ambassadors improved, even as AMC's overall production decreased from the record level achieved in 1963. However, corporate earnings per share were a meager 27 cents per share, the lowest since AMC made its famous compact car comeback in 1958. Investors received a message of the changing fortune of the automaker when the company's 1966 annual financial report was delivered in a plain brown wrapper, instead of the previous year's glossy cover. A completely new design was also slated for the larger 1967 models. This strategy added $60 million in retooling costs, a significant stretch for the company. The latest models shared fewer parts and were more expensive to build. Abernethy continued his objective to position the new Rebel and Ambassador designs on an equal basis with competitive economy models marketed by the Big Three. American Motors did not have their own electric car program as did the Big Three, and after some negotiation, a contract was drawn in 1967 with Gulton Industries to develop a new battery based on lithium and a speed controller designed by Victor Woke. A nickel-cadmium battery-powered 1969 Rambler station wagon demonstrated the power systems that, according to the scientist, was a wonderful car. This was also the start of other, plug-in, type experimental American Motors vehicles developed with Gulton, the Omnitron City concept car and later the similar Electron. Although the new models were well received by the motor industry media, the last quarter sales for AMC ended September 30, 1966 were disappointing. The company recorded a balance sheet loss of $12,648,000 for the year before tax credits and deferred tax assets. By this time the board had lost confidence in Abernethy due to his vast spending which had unstabilized the company, and each year under his leadership the company had suffered substantial financial losses. As a result, Abernethy was forced into taking an early retirement from American Motors on January 9, 1967. Abernethy was replaced by Roy D. Chapin Jr. Chapin quickly instituted changes to American Motors' offerings and tried to regain market share by focusing on younger demographic markets. Chapin's first decision was to cut the price of the Rambler to within $200 of the basic Volkswagen Beetle. Innovative marketing ideas included making air conditioning standard on all 1968 Ambassador models. This made American Motors the first U.S. automaker to make air conditioning standard equipment on a line of cars, preceding even luxury makes such as Lincoln, Imperial, and Cadillac. The company introduced exciting entries for the decade's muscle car boom, most notably the AMX. At the same time, the Javelin served as the company's entrant into the sporty pony car market created by the Plymouth Barracuda and the Ford Mustang. Additional operating cash was derived in 1968 through the sale of Kelvinator appliance, once one of the firm's core operating units. The Kelvinator divestiture left American Motors a downsized company solely manufacturing automobiles. The Rambler marque was discontinued for the larger 1968 domestic models, leaving only the small Rambler American as the last product to bear the name through 1969. The Rambler brand continued to be used only for export markets, with Mexico being the last market to use it in 1983. From 1970, American Motors was the brand used for all American Motors passenger cars, and all vehicles from that date bore the American Motors name and the new corporate logo. However, American Motors and AMC were used interchangeably in corporate literature well into the 1980s. The branding issue was further complicated when the company's Eagle all-wheel drive passenger cars were marketed as the American Eagle in the 1980s. In the late 1960s, Kaiser Industries Corporation decided to leave the automotive industry and sought a buyer for its money-losing Kaiser Jeep division. American Motors Vice President for Manufacturing, Gerald C. Myers, headed the team sent to evaluate Kaiser's Jeep factories. Although opposed by AMC's top management, Chapin made a significant decision in February 1970 to purchase Kaiser Jeep for $70 million. Although it was a gamble, Chapin believed Jeep vehicles would complement American Motors' passenger car business. The Jeep market was also a market in which the Big Three had no presence except for the Ford Bronco and the then recently introduced Chevrolet K5 Blazer/GMC Jimmy. And the largest competition outside the Big Three came from the International Scout and low-volume imports of the Land Rover, Toyota Land Cruiser, and Nissan Patrol. The latter being the only Nissan-branded vehicle in the United States until the 1980s when the Datsun name was phased out in favor of Nissan. Jeep by far had the largest market share of the 4x4 market during this time. American Motors gained the iconic Jeep brand of light trucks and SUVs, as well as Kaiser Jeep's government contracts, notably the M151 line of military Jeeps and the DJ Series postal Jeeps. American Motors also expanded its international network. The military and special products business was reconstituted as American Motors General Products Division, later reorganized as AM General. In 1970, American Motors consolidated all passenger cars under one distinct brand identity and debuted the Hornet range of compact cars. The Hornet and the later Gremlin shared platforms. The Gremlin, the first North American-built subcompact, sold more than 670,000 units from 1970 through 1978. The Hornet became American Motors' best-selling passenger car since the Rambler Classic, with more than 860,000 units sold when production ended in 1977. The Hornet platform continued to be built under various models through 1987. For a time, both the Hornet and Gremlin could be ordered with Levi's denim interiors. The new facelift, mid-sized AMC Matador replaced the Rebel in 1971. Using an advertising campaign that asked, "What's a Matador?" In 1972, American Motors won the tender for Los Angeles Police Department cruisers, and Matadors were used by the department from 1972 until 1975, replacing the Plymouth Satellite. American Motors supplied Mark 7 limited owner Jack Webb with 2 Matadors, a sedan and a wagon, for use in his popular television series Adam, 12, increasing the car's public profile. Matadors saw fleet use as taxis, government, police, and fire vehicles in some states. In 1973, American Motors signed a licensing agreement with Curtiss-Wright to build Wankel engines for cars and Jeeps. Starting in 1974, the Matador sedan and station wagon were mildly refreshed, with new boxier front and rear ends, making it full-sized. This second-generation model was produced virtually unchanged until 1978. Sagging sales and tight finances resulted in the discontinuation of the Matador line after the 1978 model, leaving American Motors to focus almost exclusively on its Hornet platform-based cars and the Jeep line. From 1970, the Rebel and Ambassador were identical from the A-pillar back. The Ambassador continued as AMC's upmarket model with higher trim, more equipment, and air conditioning as standard. From the A-pillar forward, the Ambassador was redesigned and stretched 7 inches to become the biggest ever, just as the 1973 Arab oil embargo sparked gasoline rationing across the nation. The additional length was due to a new front-end design and more substantial energy-absorbing bumpers required of all automobiles sold in the U.S. Sales of all large cars fell due to economic problems and rising gasoline prices. The Ambassador became a full-sized car in 1974 and was discontinued after the 1974 model year, leaving only the Matador as American Motors' full-size offering. Nash and American Motors made Ambassadors from 1927 through 1974, the longest use of the same model name for any American Motors product and, at the time, the longest continuously used nameplate in the industry. In 1974, the first-generation Matador two-door hardtop, known as the Flying Brick due to its poor aerodynamics in NASCAR competition, was replaced with a sleek, smoothly shaped, and radically styled two-door coupe. The model received praise for its design, including Best Styled Car of 1974 by Car and Driver magazine, customer satisfaction, and sold almost 100,000 coupes over 5 years. The Matador coupe shared few components with the Matador sedan and station wagon other than suspension, drivetrain, some trim, and interior parts. In 1974, American Motors' AM General subsidiary began building urban transit buses in cooperation with Flyer Industries of Winnipeg, Manitoba. A total of 5,431 metropolitan buses, including 219 electric trolley buses, were built before production ceased in 1979. Production of diesel buses had ceased in 1978, with only trolley bus production taking place in 1979. The AMC Pacer, an innovative all-new model introduced in March 1975 and marketed as the first wide small car, was a subcompact designed to provide the comfort of a full-sized car. Its pre-production development coincided with tightened U.S. federal passenger emissions and auto safety regulations. The Pacer sold well its first 2 years with 262,772 combined units sold in the U.S. With the Arab oil embargo of 1973, General Motors aborted the Wankel rotary engine around which the Pacer had been designed, as its fuel consumption exceeded that of conventional engines with similar power. Therefore, American Motors' existing 258 and 232 cu in AMC straight-6 engines were used in the Pacer instead. The fuel economy was better than the expected rotary engines, but the I6 gas mileage was relatively low in light of the new focus on energy efficiency. Also, as the Pacer shared few components other than the drivetrain with other American Motors cars, it was expensive to make, and the cost increased when sales fell steeply after the first 2 years. The Pacer line was discontinued in mid-1980. Development and production costs for the Pacer and Matador coupe drained capital that might otherwise have been invested in updating the more popular Hornet and Gremlin lines, so that toward the end of the 1970s, the company faced the growing energy crisis with aged products that were uncompetitive in hotly contested markets. However, AMC used cars, as far back as 1967, had the advantage of good warranty coverage, so most owners were conscious of low-cost car maintenance. AMC units became some of the very best buys on the used car market by 1975. The 1977 Gremlin had redesigned headlights, grille, rear hatch, and fascia. For economy in the fuel crisis, American Motors offered the car with a more fuel-efficient Volkswagen-designed Audi 4-cylinder engine 122 cu in. The engine was expensive for American Motors to build, and the Gremlin retained the less costly but less economical 232 cu in as standard equipment. The AMX nameplate was revived in 1977. It was a sporty appearance package on the Hornet hatchback featuring upgrades, as well as the 258 cu in inline 6 as standard with a choice of 3-speed automatic or 4-speed manual transmissions. The 304 cu in V8 engine was optional with the automatic transmission. As all Matadors now received standard equipment that was formerly optional, the Brougham package was dropped from 1977. Optional on the Matador Coupe was a Landau vinyl roof with opera windows, and top-line Barcelonas offered new two-tone paint. For the 1978 model year, the Hornet platform was redesigned with an adaptation of the new Gremlin front-end design and renamed AMC Concorde. American Motors targeted it at the emerging, premium compact market segment, paying particular attention to ride and handling, standard equipment, trim, and interior luxury. Gremlins borrowed the Concorde instrument panel, a Hornet AMX-inspired GT sports appearance package, and a new striping treatment for X models. The AMC Pacer hood was modified to clear a V8 engine, and a sports package replaced the former X package. With falling sales of Matador coupes, sedans, and wagons, their 304 cu in V8 engine was dropped, leaving only the 258 cu in and the 360 cu in V8 optional on coupes and sedans, standard on wagons. The two-tone Barcelona luxury package was offered on Matador sedans, and two-tone red paint was introduced as an additional Barcelona option. Matador production ceased at the end of the model year with total sales of 10,576 units. The Matador was no longer attractive as automakers struggled to overcome economic woes, including continuing fuel price increases and double-digit U.S. inflation. For the 1979 model year, the Spirit sedan replaced the Gremlin. A new fastback version of the car, the Spirit Liftback, proved successful. In December, Pacer production ceased after a small run of 1980 models was built to use up part stock. Concordes received a new front-end treatment, and in their final season, hatchbacks became available in DL trim. On May 1, 1979, American Motors marked the 25th anniversary of the Nash-Hudson merger with Silver Anniversary editions of the AMC Concorde and Jeep CJ in two-tone silver. Jeeps then accounted for around 50% of the company's sales and most of their profits, and introduced the Le Car, a U.S. version of the small, fuel-efficient Renault 5, in dealer showrooms. Concorde and Spirit models were dropped after 1983. In February 1977, Time magazine reported that although American Motors had lost $73.8 million in the previous 2 fiscal years, U.S. banks had agreed to a year's extension for a $72.5 million credit that had expired in January, that stockholders had received no dividends since 1974, and that Pacer sales did not match expectations. However, Time noted record Jeep sales and a backlog of orders for AM General's buses. In July 1977, it was announced that the General Services Administration of the federal U.S. government had awarded AMC a 3-year contract worth $15 million to lease 5,838 cars. Since the beginning of the fiscal year on October 1, 1976, the GSA had purchased 8,700 cars from AMC for $30 million. On October 21, 1977, Roy Chapin Jr. retired, and Gerald C. Myers became chairman and CEO. On March 31, 1978, American Motors and Renault announced a sweeping agreement for jointly manufacturing and distributing cars and trucks that would benefit both. A month later, American Motors announced that it would halt the production of standard urban transit buses after about 300 were sold by its AM General subsidiary over a period of 3 years. In May 1978, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency ordered the recall of all American Motors' 1976 cars except those conforming to California emissions regulations. Some 270,000 vehicles plus 40,000 1975 and 1976 Jeeps and mini trucks, for correction of a fault in the pollution control system. Total cost was estimated at up to $3 million, or more than AMC had earned the previous quarter. American Motors lost an estimated $65 million on its conventional cars for the fiscal year that ended September 30, 1978, but strong Jeep sales helped the company to an overall $36.7 million profit on sales of $2.6 billion. However, American Motors faced costly engineering work to bring their Jeeps into compliance with a federal directive for all four-wheel drive vehicles to average 15 mpg US by 1981. In December 1978, the government of Iran, embroiled in the Iranian Revolution, cut off oil exports to the world. This caused a devastating effect on all American automobile makers and American consumers. Gasoline prices jumped 52% between September and December 1979. Each of the big three lost money throughout 1979, leading to Chrysler becoming insolvent and considering bankruptcy by September. Ford survived only because of its European operations, eventually losing $7 billion in domestic sales from 1979 to 1982. During the crisis, and with its domestic market share at 1.83%, American Motors struck a deal with Renault, the nationally owned French automaker, in October 1979. AMC would receive a $150 million cash injection, $50 million in credits, and also the rights to start building the Renault 5 in 1982. A deal for Renault products to be sold through the American Motors Jeep dealer network had already been made in 1979. In return, Renault acquired a 22.5% interest in American Motors. This was not the first time the two companies had worked together. Lacking a prestige model line in the early 1960s, Renault assembled CKD kits and marketed Rambler cars in France. In 1979, American Motors announced a record $83.9 million profit on sales of $3.1 billion for the fiscal year ending in September. This despite an economic downturn. Soaring energy prices, rising American unemployment, automobile plants shutting down, and an American market trend towards imported cars. A drop in Jeep sales caused by the declining economy and soaring energy prices began to constrict American Motors' cash flow. At the same time, pressure increased on the company's non-Jeep product lines. The facelifts and rebranding of American Motors' once innovative and successful cars were not enough in a competitive landscape that had changed dramatically. No longer was the threat limited to the big three automakers. In response to the 1979 oil crisis, the big three had resorted to importing foreign motor vehicles, mainly Japanese models. Japanese models were mass-marketed and had lower manufacturing costs. By the end of 1980, Japanese manufacturers surpassed Detroit's production totals, becoming first in the world. Indeed, the share of Japanese cars in U.S. auto purchases rose from 9% in 1976 to 21% in 1980. The Japanese manufacturers use streamlined production methods such as outsourcing and just-in-time supply chain management. They had new, highly efficient assembly plants in the United States. And now they targeted the heart of American Motors' passenger product line, small cars. While Americans turned to the new imports in increasing numbers, American Motors continued its struggle at the inefficient and aging downtown Kenosha, Wisconsin, facilities, the oldest continuously operating automobile plant in the world, where components and unfinished bodies still had to be transported across the city. In early 1980, the banks refused American Motors further credit. Lacking both capital and resources for the new, truly modern products it needed to offer, the company turned to Renault for a $90 million loan. By September that year, American Motors' U.S. market share had fallen to 1.7%, and in November sales dropped 19.1%. American Motors warned stockholders that the company could be bankrupted if they did not approve a plan for Renault to acquire as much as 59% of the company. On December 16, 1980, American Motors shareholders overwhelmingly approved making the French government-owned Renault their company's principal owner. Jean-Marc Lepieux, former corporate treasurer at Renault, became vice president for finance at American Motors. In September 1981, José de Derwaarder, a Renault veteran of 23 years, mainly in manufacturing, became American Motors executive vice president for manufacturing. In January 1982, the company's president W. Paul Tippett Jr. replaced Gerald C. Myers as chairman and CEO, and de Derwaarder moved up to be president. By this time Renault owned 46% of American Motors. De Derwaarder brought a broad perspective at this critical time. He is credited with streamlining many of American Motors' arcane management techniques. He also instituted important improvements in plant layouts, as well as in cost and quality control. Having increased its stake in the company several times to keep it solvent, Renault eventually owned 49% in 1983. Some view this development as ending American Motors' run as a truly American car company. New ownership and management heralded a new product venture for American Motors, a line of modern front-wheel drive cars, designed by Renault, to be produced at Kenosha. In 1980, all American Motors cars received a new rust-proofing process using Z-Bart as factory rust protection. The extra protection also included aluminized trim screws, plastic inner fender liners, and galvanized steel in every exterior body panel, along with the unibody getting a deep dip bath in epoxy-based primer. American Motors backed up the rust protection program with a 5-year, no rust-through component to its comprehensive buyer protection plan. In August 1979, for the 1980 model year, American Motors introduced four-wheel drive versions of the Spirit and Concorde, calling the collective line the AMC Eagle. Eagles rapidly became one of the company's best-known products and are considered one of the first crossover SUVs. Eagles used the two-wheel drive body shells mounted on an all-new platform developed by American Motors in the late 1970s. Featuring an innovative full-time four-wheel drive system, it sold best in snow-prone areas. Sales started strongly but declined over time. While the two-wheel drive Spirit and Concorde were discontinued after 1983 as the company concentrated on its new Renault Alliance, the Eagle survived for 5 years longer, albeit only in station wagon form, into the 1988 model year. This meant the four-wheel drive Eagle was the lone representative of the American Motors brand from 1984 until the 1988 model year. All the company's remaining output was branded Renault or Jeep. The last AMC Eagle was built on December 14, 1987. The Renault Alliance was the first joint product of the American Motors-Renault partnership. Introduced in 1983, the Alliance was a front-wheel drive Renault 9 compact car slightly restyled for the American market by Dick Teague, mainly to comply with American safety standards, and produced by American Motors at Kenosha. The car was badged as a Renault, and some cars also carried American Motors badges. The new model, introduced during increased interest in small cars, won several awards, including Motor Trend Car of the Year. Motor Trend declared, "The Alliance may well be the best assembled first-year car we've ever seen. Way to go Renault." The Alliance was listed as number 1 on Car and Driver's list of 10 best cars for 1983. The positive reception and sales of 200,000 Alliances by 1984 was hindered by the availability of only 2 body styles. The Alliance was a European-designed car that was not fully suited to U.S. market demands. The distribution network was also not well supported, which led to the lower quality delivered by dealerships with disastrous consequences for the image of the automobiles and high warranty costs because of quality failings, which greatly impacted sales from 1985 to the end of production in 1987. After the 1983 model year, American Motors focused entirely on four-wheel drive autos, the company stopped producing rear-wheel drive cars. American Motors facilities were then used to assemble the Renault-branded Alliance and Encore compact and subcompact cars. For the final 1987 model year, a higher performance version of the Alliance two-door sedan and the convertible was sold as the Renault GTA. This version had a Renault 2-liter engine that was exclusive to it and not shared with the European Renault 9 and 11 models. It was described as dandy little sports car and a pocket rocket, defined as a low-priced car based on high production economy but with emphasis placed on appearance, performance and handling. The Encore models were renamed Alliance hatchback in 1987. Alliance and GTA production ended in June of that year, while the Renault 9 and 11 models continued through the 1988 model year in Europe, being replaced by the all-new Renault 19. More beneficial to American Motors' future was the introduction of an all-new line of compact Jeep Cherokee and Wagoneer models in the autumn of 1983 for the 1984 model year. Renault's François Castaing, head of AMC's product development team, designed the new Jeep platform with styling by Dick Teague. Renault was interested in selling the Cherokee in Europe, but the vehicle needed to be lighter and more fuel-efficient to meet European expectations. The new XJ weighed 3,100 pounds, due to its unibody construction and lighter components such as the front seats taken from the Renault 9 and 11 and new Renault Alliance. According to David Tracy, the new XJ Jeep was 200 pounds lighter, 31 inches shorter, 6 inches narrower, and 4 inches lower than the Cherokee SJ it replaced, and yet thanks to unibody construction the XJ kept 90% of its predecessor's interior volume. And, not only was fuel economy much improved, but articulation is also better, as is ground clearance, as well as approach, departure, and breakover angles. These, along with its smaller profile, make the XJ better both off-road and on. AMC's initial forecasts of 40,000 Cherokee and Wagoneer sales were shattered, with sales amounting to 75,000 in their first year. The three leading off-roading magazines, Peterson's Four-Wheel Off-Road, Four-Wheeler, and Off-Road each named the new Jeep Cherokee as the 4x4 of the year. The popularity of these downsized Jeeps pioneered a new market segment for what later became defined as the sport utility vehicle. They initially used the AMC 150.4 cu in OHV four-cylinder engine with a carburetor, and a General Motors-built 171 cu in carbureted V6 was optional. In 1986, throttle body injection replaced the carburetor on the 2.5 Li4 engines. A Renault 128 cu in turbodiesel i4 diesel was also offered. Starting with the 1987 models, a new 244 cu in i6 engine, derived from the older 258 cu in i6 with a new head design and an electronic fuel injection system, replaced the outsourced V6. American Motors' new engine was designed with help from Renault and incorporated Renault Bendix parts for fuel and ignition management. The 4.0 developed an outstanding reputation for reliability and toughness. Retained by Chrysler after the buyout, the design received continuous improvements and refinements until its discontinuation at the end of the 2006 model year. The AMC 4.0 engine saw extensive application in XJ Cherokees and Wagoneers, Grand Cherokees, and Wranglers, and many of those engines saw extremely long lives. Quite a few exceeding 300,000 miles. Chrysler built the XJ Cherokee until the end of the 2001 model year in the US and until 2005 in China. Three other designs continued to be used after the Chrysler buyout: the Grand Wagoneer full-size luxury SUV, the full-size J-Series pickups built on the same chassis as the earlier SJ model Wagoneers and Cherokees that dated from 1963 with the AMC 360 cu in 5.9 LV8, and the Jeep Comanche compact pickup, which debuted in 1986. Unlike most sport utility vehicles based on adapted pickup truck designs, the Cherokee XJ SUV came first, and the Comanche was designed as a later pickup truck version. Production of the full-sized pickup ceased after 1987. The Grand Wagoneer and 360 V8 engine were dropped after 1991, the last American-made vehicle whose engine used a carburetor for fuel delivery, and the Comanche was discontinued after 1992. Significant changes occurred in 1985 as the market moved away from American Motors' small models. With fuel relatively cheap again, buyers turned to larger, more powerful automobiles, and American Motors was unprepared for this development. Even the venerable Jeep CJ5 was dropped after a 60 Minutes TV news magazine staged exposé of rollover tendencies under extreme conditions. American Motors also confronted an angry workforce. Labor was taking revenge, and reports circulated about the sabotage of vehicles on the assembly lines because of the failure to receive promised wage increases. There were rumors that the aging Kenosha plant was to be shut down. At the same time, Chrysler was having trouble meeting the demand for its M-body rear-drive models Dodge Diplomat, Plymouth Grand Fury, and Chrysler Fifth Avenue. Because they were assembled using the old gate and buck system, and the tooling could be easily moved, Chrysler could supply the components and control the quality while AMC assembled the car. Therefore, Lee Iacocca and Joseph E. Cappy agreed to use some of AMC's idle plant capacity in Kenosha. In January 1985, Renault's chairman in France, Bernard Heynen, was dismissed by the government in a shakeup triggered by huge losses as a result of his goal to revolutionize Renault's product strategy in the 1970s and 1980s. He was instrumental in 1981 for the company to invest in AMC and also made Renault a full-line automaker, but this ballooned the firm's debt. Renault relinquished its number one sales position in Europe, which it held from 1980 until 1983. The company had been losing money since 1981 and had fallen to sixth place behind Ford, Fiat, Volkswagen, Peugeot, and General Motors. Strikes plagued Renault at the end of 1984, and the French government introduced price controls that severely cut the profit margins on cars sold in France, Renault's most important market. In April 1985, AMC chairman W. Paul Tippett resigned to become president of a textile company. José J. de Derwaarder, president since 1982 and chief executive officer since September 1984, announced at the Paris Auto Show in October 1985 that AMC would begin imports of the innovative 7-seat, front-wheel-drive E-Space minivan in the spring of 1986. This was part of expanding the range of Renault models that include plans for marketing the Renault Alpine GTA/A510 sports car through select AMC dealers. In December 1985, de Derwaarder became chairman of AMC's executive committee while continuing as the company's president and CEO. Joe Cappy was moved up from executive vice president to chief operating officer. And Tippett's position was filled by an ex-Renault vice president, Pierre Semerina. Semerina made his managerial reputation as a no-nonsense cost-cutter. The new management responded with tactical moves by selling the Lawn Care Will Horse Products division and signing an agreement to build Jeeps in the People's Republic of China. The Pentagon had problems with AM General, a significant defense contractor, being managed by a partially French government-owned firm. The U.S. government would not allow a foreign government to own a substantial portion of an important defense supplier. As a result, the profitable AM General division was sold to LTV Corporation. Another milestone within AMC's management was the departure of Dick Teague. He was American Motors design vice president for 23 years, an industry record. He was one of the most consistently resourceful automotive designers and responsible for many Jeep and AMC designs, including the Javelin, AMX, Hornet, Gremlin, Pacer, Matador Coupe, and the Cherokee XJ. In France, Renault continued to experience financial trouble. The investment in American Motors, including the construction of a new Canadian assembly plant in Brampton, Ontario, forced cuts at home, resulting in the closure of several French plants and mass layoffs. Renault was down to just 3 alternatives regarding its American holdings: 1. It could declare American Motors officially bankrupt, thereby losing its investment. 2. It could come up with more money, but Renault management perceived American Motors as a bottomless pit. Or 3. American Motors could be put up for sale, and the French company could get back part of its investment. At the same time, Renault's new chairman, Georges Besse, continued to champion the French firm's future in the North American market, pointing to the company's completion of the newest and most advanced automotive assembly plant in North America, then known as Rambler Assembly, as well as the recent introduction of the thoroughly modern, fuel-injected 4.0L and 2.5L engines. In addition, Jeep vehicles were riding an unprecedented surge in demand. It seemed to Besse and others that American Motors was on course for profitability. However, on November 17, 1986, Besse, who had a high profile among French capitalists, was assassinated by a member of a French clandestine far-left extremist group, Action Directe. AMC's plans to reinvigorate sales with higher-priced Renaults continued for a little longer, with the plan being a three-pronged lineup beginning with the mid-sized Medallion, the larger Premier above it, and the sporty Renault Alpine providing a halo car. The Medallion and the Premier both went on sale, but Alpine never made its planned mid-1987 rollout. Under pressure from Renault executives following Besse's death, Renault's new president, Raymond Levy, set out to repair employee relations and divest the company of its investment in American Motors. Renault owned 46.1% of American Motors' outstanding shares of stock. In 1986, American Motors posted a $91.3 million loss. The earlier agreement between Chrysler and American Motors in 1985, under which American Motors would produce M-body chassis rear-drive large cars for 5 years from mid-1986 through 1990, fed the rumor that Chrysler was about to buy AMC. According to the head of manufacturing for Chrysler, Stefan Scharf, the existing relationship with AMC producing a car for a competitor facilitated the negotiations. The Jeep Grand Cherokee was the driving force behind Chrysler's buyout of American Motors. Lee Iacocca wanted the design. Chrysler completed development and released it to the public in late 1992 and continues to use the nameplate. On March 9, 1987, Chrysler agreed to buy Renault's share in American Motors, plus all the remaining shares, for about $1.5 billion. Chrysler made no secret that they were only interested in AMC for Jeep, AMC's new assembly plant in Canada, and AMC's network of 1,300 dealerships nationwide. With the sale complete, American Motors became the Jeep Eagle division of Chrysler on August 25, 1988, and was fully merged as of March 29, 1990. The sale came at a time when the automotive press was enthusiastic about the proposed 1988 lineup of Renault, Eagle, and Jeep vehicles and reported that the small automakers' financial outlook was improving. American Motors' quarterly results for all of 1987 were positive. Chrysler purchased American Motors when the company appeared to be in an excellent financial position with its new product line. It was the Jeep brand that Chrysler CEO Lee Iacocca wanted, in particular, the ZJ Grand Cherokee, then under development by Jeep engineers, which ultimately proved highly profitable for Chrysler. However, the buyout included other attractive deal sweeteners for Chrysler. Among them was the world-class, brand-new manufacturing plant in Bramalea, Ontario, which offered Iacocca an unprecedented opportunity to increase his company's production capacity at a fire sale price. American Motors had designed and built the plant in anticipation of building the Renault 25-based Eagle Premier. Additional profitable acquisitions were the American Motors dealer network, and American Motors' underrated organization and management talent, which Chrysler quickly assimilated. Renault left the U.S. market entirely as a brand in 1987. Thus, the Renault Medallion was sold through the new Jeep Eagle division as an Eagle, not a Renault. The Jeep Eagle division was formed from the American Motors Jeep Renault dealer network. The Jeep and Eagle vehicles were marketed primarily by former American Motors dealers. The American Motors badge was last used on the Eagle sports wagon through the 1988 model year, then eliminated, and the Eagle car brand was phased out by 1998.
If you have any fond memories, please indicate it at the comments below. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and like.